After this lesson, you can spot the early signs of when a user is starting to disengage. First, before we get into it, one point I want you to take away today is that even happy users that are engaged with the product at some point may disengage over time. And the reasons for that can change. For example, maybe the product is no longer relevant in this current stage of life, or maybe there's other external influences on their reasons for using the product or not. Your job as a lifecycle marketing practitioner is to remind the user why they started, and use contextual reminders like, for example, a message saying time for your Tuesday workout for a fitness app, and also progress reports to bring them back and help them re-engage. Let's look at what drifting actually means. So a drifting user is a user that still pays for the product. They still have a need at some point in their lives, and their usage is declining, and you can spot that in your data. But the key distinction is that drifting users, they haven't actually decided to leave yet, which is why we don't consider them yet churned. Let's think about how to spot a drifting user. So some of the common signals are perhaps they have longer gaps in between sessions. So maybe at some point they were using the product every single day, and now you're seeing that this segment is using the product weekly. They might also have a drop in core action frequency. So maybe for a meditation app, at some point they were meditating every day. Maybe now that's less frequent, but they're maybe engaging with sort of secondary features more like sleep casts, for example. They might also have shifted from active usage to passive browsing. So remember before we talked about app open as a metric, perhaps these users are opening the app and sort of clicking around browsing, but they're not doing anything that signals deeper engagement with the product. They could also be ignoring your messaging, could be another signal. Maybe they're not responding to push notifications or emails, for example. And maybe as well that they have a reduced depth of feature usage. So at one point they might have been using the full flexibility of the product, and now they're kind of sticking to maybe one feature or using certain features less. So it's important to also consider that drift is relative to your app's natural usage cadence, as we talked about earlier. So for example, if we go back to our period tracking app, if a user is drifting, that would typically mean that they're not using the app on a monthly basis. Why does drifting deserve its own strategy? Well, unlike churn, drift is largely reversible. Churn is expensive, right? So if we pay to acquire users and we have that user in the product for a while, and then they hard churn, so they've completely stopped paying for the product, stopped using it, maybe even deleted the product or app, it is really difficult to get that user to come back, even if you're sending them discounts or reminders to come back to the product. And of course, that's users that you've spent money to acquire that are now no longer generating revenue. So what we always say is that we want to retain users in the product, because retaining existing users is cheaper than trying to acquire new users into the product over time. And most churn signals before like cancellation. So as we've just talked about, there are always signs that certain segments are going to churn over time. So it's up to you as the practitioner to be monitoring the data, to be monitoring these segments, and to step in and act before that final churn happens. And another point is that disengaged users, they still have a need. So maybe that need or maybe that use case has changed. And I'll talk to you about a real world case study with regards to that later on in the slides. But maybe, there's been a change in their life. Maybe they've moved to a different place. Maybe they have different habits, different needs. But, that's what they're acting on right now. And I think the point that I'm trying to make is understanding how their lives and their use cases has changed, and being able to adapt to that, both through the product and through the relevant messages that you are sending.